Imagine sitting down across a chessboard, feeling confident in your opening strategy. Your opponent is a quiet, 6-year-old child from Chennai, India. Within 12 moves, your pieces are completely disorganized, your king is hopelessly cornered, and the child softly whispers, "Checkmate." As you stare at the 64 squares in utter defeat, a wave of frustration turns into curiosity. Who designed this beautiful, agonizing trap? Where did this system of absolute psychological warfare actually come from? If you search for the single genius inventor who drew up the rules of chess, you will find yourself lost in a labyrinth of ancient myths, dusty palace records, and archaeological mysteries. The surprising truth is that no single human mind could have engineered this game. To modern players, chess looks like a static masterpiece created by a single inventor. It isn't. Chess was not invented. It was discovered through a process of cognitive niche construction. This is the evolutionary mechanism where humans build external mental tools to model, calculate, and survive the complexities of their social and physical environments. Board games are not trivial pastimes. They are mathematical abstractions of conflict, resource scarcity, and territorial control. Early humans did not play games for mere entertainment. It was not a game of leisure. It was a simulator for survival. This evolutionary reframe raises a fundamental question. How did a simple tool used for rolling dice and telling the future suddenly transform into a game of absolute, deterministic strategy where luck was completely banned? The transition from random chance to pure calculation is one of the greatest cognitive leaps in human history. This transition is being actively mapped by modern science. Dr. Cameron Brown of Maastricht University leads the Digital Ludeme Project, a computational study funded by the European Research Council. Brown's team uses genetic algorithms to break games down into their smallest functional units of rules, called ludemes. By analyzing the ludemes of ancient board games, his software acts as a cognitive DNA sequencer, tracing how game mechanics mutated and crossed borders over thousands of years. Alongside Brown, Dr. Irving Finkel, a world-renowned cuneiform scholar at the British Museum, has documented how early play transitioned from cosmic divination to human agency. Their research shows that before chess could exist, humans had to discover a way to separate human intellect from the whims of fate. This journey began on an ancient, uncheckered 8x8 grid in India known as the Ashtapada, dating back over 2,000 years. On this board, players rolled cowrie shells or dice to race pieces around the grid, mimicking the unpredictable nature of the cosmos. What historical crisis in ancient India forced these early players to throw away their dice and design a game modeled on real military divisions? The answer lies in the geopolitical landscape of the 6th century Gupta Empire. During this era of shifting borders and intense military rivalry, regional states required a cognitive tool to train young princes in statecraft and military strategy. To achieve this, court scholars took the 8x8 Ashtapada board and stripped away the dice entirely. By removing chance, they forced the human brain to take absolute, unyielding responsibility for every action. This was the birth of Chaturanga, the direct ancestor of chess. Chaturanga translates to 4 divisions, representing the 4 branches of the ancient Indian military: infantry, cavalry, elephants, and chariots. The pieces moved according to their physical limitations in the real world. The Raja, or king, was weak and moved only 1 square in any direction, representing the vulnerability of the monarch. The Mantri, or counselor, was a highly limited defensive piece that could only move 1 square diagonally. The Gaja, or elephant, moved by jumping exactly 2 squares diagonally, reflecting its heavy, trampling nature. The Ashva, or horse, moved in the familiar L shape, jumping over obstacles like cavalry. The Ratha, or chariot, swept across the board in straight lines, while the Padati, or foot soldiers, marched slowly forward 1 square at a time. It was not a game of leisure. It was a simulator for survival. These original rules created a slow, grinding war of attrition, where victory required total tactical dominance. But how did this ancient Indian war game escape its borders and mutate as it traveled along the Silk Road into Persia and the Islamic world? As merchant caravans and diplomatic envoys traveled between empires, they carried Chaturanga into Sasanian Persia during the reign of King Khosrow I. The Persians adopted the game with enthusiasm, renaming it Shatranj. They also modified the terminology to reflect their own culture. The Raja became the Shah, and when the king was cornered, players would declare Shah Mat, meaning the king is helpless, which evolved into our modern word checkmate. When Arab armies conquered Persia in the 7th century, they embraced Shatranj and cataloged its strategies. The earliest chess manuals, such as the 9th century manuscripts by the Arab master al-Adli, show that Shatranj was played with intense analytical rigor. Because the pieces were still relatively slow, games could last for days. Players developed opening patterns called tabiya, or battle arrays, slowly maneuvering their armies toward each other. It was a game of deep patience, representing the prolonged siege warfare of the medieval Middle East. For nearly 800 years, this slow, defensive version of chess dominated the medieval world. Why did the weakest piece on the medieval board, the furs or vizier, suddenly transform into the most destructive, all-powerful queen we play with today? This radical mutation occurred in late 15th century Europe, particularly in Spain and Italy. The game underwent a sudden, violent transition known as the Mad Queen's Chess, or Scacchi della Donna Arrabbiata. This rule change occurred during the rise of powerful, autonomous female monarchs in Europe, most notably Isabella I of Castile, who unified Spain, ended the Reconquista, and financed the voyages of Christopher Columbus. The weak defensive vizier, which could only move a single diagonal square, was replaced by the omnipotent queen. This new piece combined the unlimited straight-line power of the rook with the diagonal reach of the bishop. At the same time, the pawns were granted the ability to move 2 squares on their very first move, speeding up the opening phase of the game. These changes completely transformed the cognitive nature of the game. Matches that once required hours of slow maneuvering could now end in sudden, explosive checkmates. The game adapted to reflect a new era of global empire, centralized power, and high-stakes gunpowder warfare. By modifying the rules, European society had discovered a new way to simulate the changing nature of geopolitical power. How did this medieval simulator of physical warfare transition into the ultimate test of human versus machine intelligence? The final phase of the discovery of chess did not take place on a wooden board, but inside the silicon architecture of modern computers. In the mid-20th century, the pioneers of computer science, including Alan Turing and Claude Shannon, realized that chess was the perfect laboratory for studying machine intelligence. Chess has a game tree complexity of approximately 10 to the power of 120, a number far greater than the total number of atoms in the observable universe. This complexity made brute force calculation impossible for early computers, forcing scientists to develop heuristic programming, which allowed machines to evaluate positions and make decisions based on strategic patterns. When IBM's Deep Blue defeated world champion Garry Kasparov in 1997, it was not just a victory for a machine. It was the culmination of a 12,000-year human journey. Chess had evolved from a tool used to predict the future with dice into the very instrument used to teach artificial intelligence how to think. The long evolution of chess demonstrates that our ancestors did not merely play games to escape reality. They used games to master it. What began as a handful of carved ivory figurines buried in the ruins of Samarkand became a universal system of thought, crossing languages, empires, and technologies. By simulating conflict on an 8x8 grid, the human mind created a safe space to test the limits of logic, foresight, and adaptability. This cognitive tool allowed humanity to externalize its strategic thinking, transforming the chaotic violence of ancient warfare into a structured, intellectual pursuit that continues to challenge our species today. It was not a game of leisure, it was a simulator for survival, and in mastering its rules, we discovered the blueprint of our own intelligence.